This lecture is the second lecture in our Road to the Civil War series, and this is mostly about manifest destiny and westward expansion as we approach the Civil War. In our first lecture, we focused on slavery, the arguments for and arguments against. This one's going to be kind of one of the reasons slavery expands. So by about 1820, this is what the United States looks like. We have a large section of unorganized territory as a result of the Louisiana Purchase, Spanish and eventually Mexican territory in the Southwest, and this joint United States-British occupation of the Oregon country. Missouri is obviously going to come in as a slave state, and Maine is a free state in the Missouri Compromise, but you can see there's a clear division between slave and free states in the country. So as we go through this period of manifest destiny, it kind of starts with Jefferson with the Louisiana Purchase, and it's a big move, but then it kind of calms down. Jackson, Van Buren, Harrison, Tyler, and eventually James K. Polk will be the big expansionists, and James K. Polk is probably the biggest among them, and he will run for president in 1845 and win. So Polk is trying to drum up support for manifest destiny and westward expansion. We have this issue of the disputed territory between the United States and Britain in Oregon, and we get this slogan from Polk, 5440 or fight, meaning that our border should be the 5440 latitude, which was higher up in the Canadian territory. He's running against Henry Clay, and he's going to beat Henry Clay partially because of this manifest destiny fever that's taking over. The election is close, but Polk does win. So he realized almost immediately upon taking office that this is a campaign rhetoric, and we cannot really actually go to fight Britain over this. So we eventually make a deal with Britain to satisfy Americans and get a large chunk of the Oregon territory and kind of deal with our northern border. So as we see with most American presidents, they say things in the campaign, and then when they get into the reality of governing, it's a little bit different. So he set about instead to negotiate a more reasonable Canadian border. So he compromises with the British and divides the Oregon country at the 49th parallel, because that was kind of the northern border of most of the rest of the country. So it just makes a clean border between the United States and Canada. So we obviously have our eastern border, the Atlantic Ocean. We have our southern border, which is the Gulf of Mexico. We have our northern border. So we want to get that southwest section taken care of. So he concentrated on Mexico, which is this newly independent country from Spain. He tried to buy the territory, but the negotiations failed, so he sends militia under Zachary Taylor to the Rio Grande to protect Texas, which is an independent country and wants to be annexed into the United States. So Taylor provokes the Mexican government until it attacked the American troops, and therefore Polk can say, well, they attacked us first, so we can go to war with them. Again, kind of one of a long line in, Americans have to be attacked to get a war declaration, but it's also the idea that sometimes those attacks are provoked by us or they're not real attacks. So Congress granted the declaration in 1846, the Mexican-American War begins. So we have the Mexican-American War, and again, period 5 starts in 1844 with kind of the election of Polk, because he's kind of a big transition president into this real manifest destiny push. So as the United States is dominating this war, because again, the Mexican government's relatively new, and they had just got out of this war with the Spanish, Polk orders troops across the Southwest into California, and he's trying to get as much territory of that Southwest section as possible. And eventually we invade Mexico City, and the war is over, the United States being victorious, and therefore we can now kind of negotiate what we want out of the Mexican-American Wars Treaty. So we get this Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, and Mexico handed over almost all of the modern Southwest. We get the future states of New Mexico, California, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah out of this. So it is an enormous win for the United States, and we kind of cap the frontier with this. We will eventually get Alaska after the Civil War, and Hawaii a little bit later, but we get our lower 48 states, or what will make up the lower 48 states, out of the Mexican-American War. So we have these long-term causes of the Mexican-American War. Obviously, the idea of manifest destiny, that it is our destiny to own from sea to shining sea. But we also want that access to California. We want to get into the southern Pacific Ocean. We hear that there might be gold there. In 1849, there's going to be that pushed there. The immediate causes are when Texas applies for statehood in 1845, Mexico refusing to sell us California, and then this border dispute between the Nueces and Rio Grande River. The effects, we get this Mexican cession, including California and everything we kind of wanted in the Southwest, and it's going to increase disputes over the expansion of slavery, which will eventually lead to the Civil War, which is why it's considered a cause. So after we get the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we have to figure out, okay, when we get these new states, what are they going to be? Slave, free? How are we going to decide? Because the Missouri Compromise said anything above the southern border of Missouri cannot be slave, and we have a lot of land now that's going to be above that border, so it makes the Southerners quite afraid that slavery might be in danger here. So just to kind of cap off the Mexican-American War, we get all that land that becomes known as the Mexican Cession. Several states will come out of it. The Rio Grande River becomes the border between the United States and Mexico, and the U.S. will pay $15 million to get this Gadsden purchase, but also to kind of calm relations between the Mexican government and the American government down. So how does this affect slavery? Northerners wanted to pass a bill that would prevent the South from having any other slave states, so they're pushing even past the Missouri Compromise, and they get this bill called the Wilmot Proviso, a congressional bill mandating that the prohibition of slavery in any territory gained in the Mexican-American War. The bill fails to pass, but it scares the South because you see the North trying to limit slavery. The Northerners began to feel suspicious that there was slave power all over the country. As I said in the last lecture, 2/3 of our presidents after the Revolution were slave owners. A lot of the Supreme Court is from the South, and obviously there's a large section of the Congress that is from southern states blocking these types of things. A feeling that the Southerners dominated the country because they always got their way with slavery. Slavery continues to expand, even though several Northerners, which is the kind of the population center of the country, don't want it. So there's this distrust that is growing by the time we get to the Mexican-American War. So to further kind of create fear and distrust between the North and the South, that gag rule that we have discussed that was passed in 1836 raises suspicion that there's this slave power going on, because how can the South produce this thing when they don't have as many, as much of a population as the North does? However, the defeat of the Wilmot Proviso really reinforces those suspicions, and they become kind of solid. The failure of the Proviso, which was strongly supported by the North, leads to the formation of a Free Soil Party, a new political party, a regional single-issue party that was devoted to the goals of the Wilmot Proviso, simply making the Mexican Cession free. And the fact that we have a political party that is just based on, stopping slavery from expanding, not stopping slavery completely, but stopping slavery from expanding, does scare us, and what's going to, or at least the South. And what's going to happen eventually in 1860 is the Free Soil Party is kind of going to go with this American Party and eventually get into the Republican Party. And when Abraham Lincoln wins the election in 1860, a lot of Southerners look at this and say, well, there's a lot of Free Soilers in the new Republican Party of 1860, so obviously Abraham Lincoln's going to go after slavery. He says very many times, I'm not going to go after slavery, but the distrust kind of shadows everything that is said from here on out until the Civil War. And that wraps up this lecture on part 2 of the road to the Civil War.